Hey, my name is Will Soper. Today I'm going to talk about webbing interfaces with trees, or my anchorage material interfacing with my tree. I'm not going to get in the weeds of inspecting the anchors. I'm not going to get in the weeds of materials too much. I'm going to really try and stay out of it. I just want to talk about a couple of simple techniques that we can use to make a quick, fast anchor. Right? There's lots of crazy multi-point anchors and things like that. We're keeping it super simple, just that way when we get in person, we can go over some of the more complex stuff quickly and get to building things faster. Okay? So, just some quick kind of nomenclature. These are nylon slings, they're fatter, they are more resistant to heat than Dyneema. This is Dyneema. It is less resistant to heat. Nylon will also take a shock load slightly better. You shouldn't do it, but it is better than Dyneema. Dyneema is incredibly static, so it does not stretch or give much at all. Dyneema also has a very, very low melting point. Some newer anchor straps, this is not really an anchor strap, but you can use it to make anchors. Some newer anchor straps are made with Technora. It is moderately static. It is incredibly abrasion and heat resistant. So if that's a concern, which hopefully it's not, but if it is a concern, then maybe Technora. Mainly just, we should dive into materials another day, but just keep that in mind. If you're looking at webbing, you're going, why is this one so much smaller than this one? It's because this one's made with Dyneema, which once again is super, super static and melts at a much lower temperature, versus nylon, which is more resistant to heat, has a higher melting point, and is less static. But it's also bulkier. So I try and make better anchors. I try not to shock load them, and I use Dyneema. That's up to you. The reason I tend to use sewn slings versus carrying a bunch of webbing, I find webbing is kind of tedious to tie in the field. If you're sitting there trying to tie a ring bend or a water knot while it's cold, and you're trying to perform a rescue and you're trying to get all these other things done, webbing can just be really, really tedious. Sewn slings like this just make life so much faster. So I tend to carry sewn slings, and I'll keep a piece of webbing in my backpack for rigging more complex things or lashing a patient in. I tend not to use it as much for anchorages. Some other quick nomenclature. This is a single length sling. It ends up being roughly 22 inches long. It also coincidentally is roughly 22 kilonewtons. The length thing I think is actually more of a European measurement, but that doesn't matter. Long story short, we would refer to this as a single sling or a runner. So if this length is a runner, this would be like a half or a shorty. Right? This one is twice the length of this one. So we call this one a double runner. Tri-length, I'll let you guess how long this one is. And then I also have a quad here. I think they make some longer ones. I think Black Diamond has whatever pentasling, I don't think they call it that, but they make them really long. I really like tri-length. That seems to be my sweet spot. Anne tends to prefer quad length for some of her slings. I know she at least tries to carry one of them. People have their preferences. What I would say is, if you're unsure and still learning, pick up one of a couple of them and figure it out. Find how you like to tie your anchorages, and figure out your own preferences. So, let's get into basics. The most simple way of doing this would be to do what's called a basket hitch. So in this case, you just go around it. You clip all the strands. It's super strong. When we rate slings, we pull them end to end like this. Mentioned earlier that these end up being about 22 kilonewtons, roughly 5,000 pounds. If I double it over like this around an object, I get close to twice that. It's not going to be perfect. Real world, it probably will not be 10,000 pounds. My carabiner is not rated to 10,000 pounds, so it doesn't really matter. But it is very strong. It is not redundant, so if the alien laser beams or whatever else decides to cut this, or what I would be more concerned with is running rope across it and cutting it with another rope accidentally, then the whole thing would just unravel. Okay, so if there's a concern, then what we can do is add a master point. Okay. So what a master point looks like is I go around it. So now I have my basket hitch. Master point is a knot that we tie here. It can be a figure eight, it can be an overhand. Sometimes if I have a lot of excess sling, I'll tie like a figure 9, which is just another half turn from a figure 8. Some things to keep in mind here. I want to keep this angle less than 120. Same thing as when I was tying my knots earlier, or when we get into multiple nodes, I want to keep this less than 120. This is clearly less than 120. We're good. It is now redundant, right? If I were to cut one of these strands, I actually have this other one underneath it. Ideally, I won't be cutting strands, but that is nice. The downside is, if I really load the crap out of this, I can almost like weld the strands together, and the knot can get so compact and so tight, you can't undo it. A really simple solution for that is we do something called a crush carabiner. Okay. I like to leave it right here in the nose, or the top of it. I think it's actually the basket of it. So what it does is it creates space. So if I weld it, or try and pull it as tight as I can, when I take the carabiner out, the space that the carabiner was taking up is now left as slack in my knot. So that means it's really easy to untie. We do want to be careful how we put a crush carabiner in there. What we want is a carabiner that does not have a hook. So you see out here, there's no hook for the strands to get caught on. It's a nice smooth carabiner. This one, it would potentially grab strands and make it more difficult to undo. The other thing is, you're not supposed to clip into that carabiner. So I really like carrying a couple of small non-locking carabiners that don't have a hook. That way I can use it as a crush carabiner, and people should know that non-lockers are not good for clipping into. If you start using locking carabiners, people might accidentally clip into it. So be careful with that. We do not want a hook, and I prefer non-lockers so that people don't clip into it. Let me show that one more time just because of how easy it is. So I've just gone around the tree. I'm tying a knot. Boom. That's my master point. My angle is less than 120. I have these strands I can clip into. If I want it to be easy to undo, put my non-locking carabiner in up there. To undo it, take my carabiner out. That space is already provided. Boom. Okay. If I'm concerned with the the anchor sliding up or down the tree. Maybe I'm doing I'm building a small anchor for a artificial high directional. Or excuse me, it wouldn't be artificial, just be a high directional. So if I'm building an anchor for a high directional, what I can do is put a round turn on it, like so. Then do my master point. Alright, so I've tied my master point. Once again, I am going to add a carabiner to make it easier to undo. This angle is less than 120. I have my strands down here I can clip into. Super strong. If one of these strands gets cut, I still have the other one, and it shouldn't slide all the way up the tree. Great for high directionals, great for basal anchors, all that fun stuff. Okay. One thing I do want to avoid, I'm going to bring it up because I want to be, you'll see it a lot, but I want people to be really clear on this. I said earlier that this roughly doubles the strength. I say roughly, when we actually pull test things, they vary, right? Also, my carabiner is not rated at 10,000 pounds, so really not that big of a deal. If I do this number and then pull on it, I end up with this one point right here that practically has a 2-to-1 on it. It's not quite a 2-to-1, but practically has a 2-to-1 on it. It's also, that's the only point that's seeing the 2-to-1, which means that it roughly halves the strength of it. So it roughly halves the strength of 22 kilonewtons. So in theory, it would be at 11 kilonewtons. It's not in practice. It actually is more in practice. However, there's other ways of solving, there's other ways of making anchors where we don't have to do this. So I would recommend avoiding this if we can. Some anchorages, for instance, I have some cable, some wire strops. So these are actually designed to be able to cinch. Okay. They have a rating on it. So this one is 23 kilonewtons, even if I'm cinching it like this, okay? Some things are designed for it. Most of your sewn slings are not designed for it. Also, I've only said about 27 times that Dyneema melts at a lower melting point. When I do stuff like this, I actually generate a lot of heat on that one small section at Dyneema. So really do avoid that anchor, right? It's called a girth hitch. People also call it a choker. Really avoid it. There's better solutions. Unless you're using a product that is specifically designed for it, just don't, right? Basket hitch it. If you need it to not slide up and down, put a round turn on it, and that'll be much stronger, much better. So, sound good? Basket hitch. If we need it to not slide, add a round turn. If we're worried about it, add a master point. One more little quick thing before I go. I'm almost done, I promise. All right. We're here. This is a basket hitch. Tying a master point. Putting a crush carabiner in it. Okay. I can actually girth hitch this. The reason I can do this on my rigging plate is you tend not to have the same, you can't end up with the same cinching mechanism that I could on the tree. So it ends up being actually slightly stronger than if I was doing it around the tree. And if you notice, I have 2 strands here, not the one when I did it around the tree. So this is a way to save a carabiner if I know I'm going to use a rigging plate. Be mindful, if I'm doing a high line off of it, I may want a more robust anchor. But as far as rigging a system, it's completely redundant, right? As far as the sling goes, redundant sling. It's not a redundant tree, it's not a redundant hillside, it's not a redundant rigging plate, but the sling itself is redundant. Then I can use my rigging plate here to run my system off of. So, quick way of saving a carabiner and really fast anchor, right? All right. Thank you for your patience. Go practice some of these. I'll see you guys in person, and we'll hopefully get into some more complex multi-point anchors. Thank you guys.